fundamental objective. We are looking at the secondary objectives. The secondary objectives emerge from the recommendations of the committees. Let me just give you an example. The Committee on Good Governance indicated that the criteria on the tenure of the office of the flag bearer, that's why they said that the flag bearer shall head a transitional government for a period of 3 years. The transitional president shall be open, transparent, and accountable to all during the transition. The transitional president shall respect the views and rights of the citizens. The transitional president shall not support any party during the transition period. The transitional president shall not seek for re-election until after the 5 years after the transitional period. The transitional leader must be a unifier, good listener, team player, and easily accessible person. Each contestant shall make pledges to respect and uphold all the conditions circumscribing his or her tenure as established by the coalition. So you can see that the coalition was being weaved in progress. Imagine meeting on the 17th of October and drafting all these documents. And on the 30th, within 2 weeks, you held a convention. From 30th October to 30th November, 1 month. 30th November to 1st December, 1 day. Within 1 month, 2 days, you change power that was mightier than any power ever established in the Gambia. So you can see the sequence of events. And therefore, these, what you saw here, or what you see here as recommendation, should and were incorporated in what you call a draft. There's nothing like a draft document. Something was prepared for us to consider. It was never considered. And all this were incorporated in it. And that should have guided the second process. That second process is executive power situated in the Constitution. And that executive power has absolute authority to appoint ministers, to remove ministers, whilst the governance established by the coalition would have required consultation with the coalition. You'll be able to get these documents later so that you see what was prepared to guide the implementation of any recommendation made by the coalition at the level of executive power once it assumes responsibility. You've asked me the question, was I offered? On the 25th of December, you've heard the president made a statement indicating that we were going to establish an agency for sustainable socio-economic development. The agency will establish an expert bank, and all Gambians will send their curriculum vitae, which they did, many did. And from the expert bank, we'll create clusters of experts on all issues of national development. And they will make their recommendation, short, medium, long-term recommendation, before the president assumes office as a start. And those ministers who will eventually be appointed will rely on those documents to start the process of governance. I volunteered to head that agency. The documents were given to some members of the coalition to vet. Eventually, we had a consultant, pristine consultancy, go and ask the gentleman, to prepare the template to create the database for all Gambians and anybody else in the world who would wish to be part of that expert bank. Did that happen? All became chaff in the wind. So do we say that is the failure of a coalition? Is the failure of the executive assuming office and beginning to run a government like a normal government? Eventually, it was not a coalition government that came into being. It's the executive presidency that came into being.
Thank you, Honorable. Thank you very much, gentlemen. I think the media is ready, but I'd like to fire a few questions to set the ball rolling. And I'd also like to propose, as many have also asked, that at the end, each of you may choose a local language for closing remarks, perhaps use it to summarize if you may. Honorable Sallah, is this reasonable? Doctor?
It's reasonable.
Maybe 5 to 10 minutes in the end, so somebody will speak a Wolof or a Mandinka somewhere so that we'll carry the general public along. Dr. Cessay, my first question to you is, a dictatorship ended by the coming together of these political parties. We've seen the setting up of commissions. We've seen the National Human Rights Commission. We've seen the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We've seen reforms and change. And in fact, media freedom, proliferation of political parties. Will you not attribute all of these to success of Coalition 2016? If yes, yes. If no, 2 minutes.
Well, no to some extent. No to some extent. The TRRC is yet to be ready. We are waiting. If the TRRC's recommendations are not fully implemented, it has failed. The Janet Commission's recommendations have not been fully implemented. There is still fiscal indiscipline in this country. They suggested and recommended for 28 people to be expunged from the civil service. For taking part in sleaze, they are still serving in government. So therefore, the selective manner of the implementation of the Janet Commission, and also the things that the Janet Commission recommended have not been implemented, so that's a failure. As we saw recently, when we received these so-called COVID organics from Guinea-Bissau, a government official went to the central bank to withdraw 2.1 million from the counter, and the statutory limit was to be $100,000. So it means that for that has failed. Media freedom. It's the media that fought for it. Gambians voted. The coalition cannot take credit. That is why I think leadership has failed in the coalition. Let them come out and take responsibility as well, so that we know that, to be honest, they've taken responsibility that it has failed. But to be honest, I don't attribute the freedom to the coalition. Gambians came out to vote, and they voted out the dictator. And it was not only the success of the coalition, it is the success of every Gambian. So I wouldn't attribute that success to the coalition.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Honorable Sallah, a lot of fingers are pointed in your direction to say, you designed such a beautiful document, the coming together, unbelievable that this was possible. You guided, you molded, you've written, you've spoken, you've calmed the public, you participated, only to withdraw your support and participation after winning. That, in fact, many say, is the reason why it's not fully implemented. The objectives have not been attained because of your lack of participation yourself. Yes? No? 2 minutes.
I believe we must distinguish before you establish a government and after you establish a government. The coalition is pre-government and post-government. I have made it very clear that the coalition ceased to exist once executive power was assumed. You started to have a normal government. That is the reality. And when you have a novel government, the president will consult, the UDP will consult all the other parties, PPP, etc., and say, I'm offering you this ministerial post. If they accept, then that becomes their post. Then to look into all the provinces, people with the expertise, and appoint them as ministers. That's executive presidency. I will not take account for anything that went wrong after the assumption of office, because nobody consulted me on how to run a government after that. That is the point. Secondly, we assumed as DOI that we could move into a coalition trajectory by having a National Assembly, which was Coalition National Assembly. But that didn't happen. And I must ask Dr. Cessay and all the other people who talked about the failure, why didn't they stand for National Assembly elections? It was open to every Gambian to go and stand and be a National Assembly member because the coalition did not exist anymore. we did not participate as coalition members in the National Assembly election. Every single Gambian